Good afternoon, everyone. I know that it has been a packed day and people's brains are probably a little bit feeling overloaded with all of the very interesting conversations that we've had throughout the day. My name's Nisha Biswal, and I am the Assistant Administrator for the Asia Pacific region at USAID. And I'm really pleased to be here this afternoon to take the conversation in a little bit different direction, to talk about energy access, growth, and sustainability, and focusing in on going from micro to macro and all of the challenges in between. Currently, 400 million Indians do not have access to electricity or clean forms of energy. This limits their economic opportunity, it impinges on their access to education, results in higher rates of spoilage in crops and inefficiency in agriculture, and certainly through the well-documented impacts on indoor pollution caused by cook stoves has impacts on their health. Bringing electricity and clean forms of energy to the 1/3 of Indians that currently are deprived of them is a monumental imperative for India, and I would say for the world. So both in terms of human development, but also in terms of India's own growth and the growth of the region. This means, however, that India's demand for energy is set to grow as much as 50% just by 2020. And keeping up with that demand in a way that addresses environmental and health concerns is going to require concerted action. This conversation and this panel today is going to look at some of the ways to improve energy access, and we've got a really impressive panel that is going to talk about it from very different perspectives, and I think it'll be an interesting conversation. What I want to start with is my colleague from the State Department, with Jacob Moss, who is the director for the U.S. Cook Stoves Initiative at the State Department, and he was the key architect of the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves, a 10-year, $250 million effort with over 650 partners to catalyze global solutions to the world's 4th worst health risk factor, the 4 million deaths annually that are attributed to exposure from smoke from cook stoves. Jacob, with that, why don't I let you walk us through the work that you've been doing and some of the data that you have found in that effort. Oh, am I passing this down? Yeah.
Thanks very much, Nisha, and thanks to Terry and Yale for inviting me here and to participate on this panel. I appreciate it. There's a couple of recent studies that come out that I wanted to just share some slides on because the data is so compelling. So I wanted to show a couple of slides. I'm not sure how to, there we go. So this is a table from the recently released Global Burden of Disease study that came out in December of 2012, about 6 months ago. And it's the summary study for the entire world looking at essentially why people die, and retrospectively looking at 1990 and then looking at 2010 and seeing the trends from that. It's a very broad health study looking at all of those health impacts and sources of mortality. And then within that, there's one paper, the final paper, is a comparative risk assessment that looks at 67 different risk factors and attributes that mortality to those different risk factors. And so this chart right here shows the attribution of risk and the leading risk factors around the world. And as you can see, the top 4 are in order: high blood pressure, smoking, alcohol use, and number 4 is household air pollution associated with solid fuels, which is essentially people cooking with solid fuels such as wood, charcoal, dung, coal, and the extraordinary exposures to smoke that they get from that. Indoor levels of air pollution, 1 or 2 orders of magnitude higher than what we would consider safe air anywhere in the world. It's essentially, the only thing worse than that would be somehow harnessing all of that smoke and bringing it down into a little pipe and sucking it deep into your lungs, which is essentially what smoking is. Sorry. This may not work, I'm sorry. There we go. So it's now ranked as the 4th worst health risk factor in the world, and the 2nd worst for women and girls. And within India, over 1 million deaths are estimated to occur and attribute to the use of traditional cooking stoves alone. And it's the single worst health risk factor in all of South Asia, actually, which is shocking. This is a chart from the International Energy Agency from about 5 or 6 years ago. I want to sort of point out a couple things about it which are very interesting. It's comparing the mortality and the trends associated with smoke from biomass, which is cookstove smoke or household air pollution, with malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV. The 2 interesting things to know are, first of all, the 4 million figure would make the pink bar on the left for cookstove smoke go up to probably over the top of the page at this point. And the estimate now exceeds the cumulative impact from HIV, malaria, and TB, which add up to about 3.8 million deaths per year. So just to put that in perspective. And then secondly, as you can see from the trends, all the other 3 mortalities are expected to decrease over the coming 20 years, 15, 20 years, whereas because of population growth, the mortality associated with cook stoves is expected to go up. That's not to suggest, and I would never suggest, that we should take resources from addressing those other issues and put them towards this, but it does suggest that if we put resources towards solving these issues, we can succeed. And that's what we want to do on this issue as well. And then my final slide is this, which comes from a paper that Dr. Ramanathan and several of us published about a week and a half ago in Environmental Science and Technology. And I pulled this particular table out of it because people talk about cook stoves often. There's a lot of studies that come out saying, oh, we studied this cook stove and it wasn't so clean after all. And for me, there's a great amount of confusion and uncertainty around what constitutes a so-called improved cook stove. And not all cook stoves are improved. Many of them, we're just emerging now with some standards to define what it all means. But not all cook stoves are trying to be clean. Some are just trying to save impacts on forests, or saving women time, or protecting women from being attacked while they're collecting fuel, or from a long-term climate perspective, trying to reduce CO2 emissions. For those stoves, the technologies that we're really after are those that save fuel, which, if this would work, you could see pictures of them. There's a couple of them that are very good at saving fuel, including at least 2 that are being sold in India, made and sold in India. For other technologies, such as these, and the middle one there is actually made in India as well, made by Prakti. Those are the same sort of combustion devices, which basically just get the heat from the stove better into the pot, and then vent the smoke through a chimney outside. So they're going to reduce the immediate smoke exposures, but they're not going to reduce the smoke combustion in a dramatic way. They do offer 2 burners, which is a nice thing from a social perspective, because the women don't have to have 2 stoves going at the same time. To really reduce the production of the smoke overall, which will get to the health and the larger climate impacts in terms of black carbon, you need more advanced combustion devices, such as the Philips stove, the Orja stove made in India, the EcoChula. All of those were available in India. 2 of them still are right now. And those will dramatically reduce the actual production of the smoke. And if used by the women, then by the families, then they will reduce the associated mortality, as well as all the different other environmental and climate impacts that we're after. Ultimately, to get the benefits that we're seeking, we need to get to clean fuels, such as LPG, biogas, or ethanol. That's what's going to get us down to the WHO standards. I also want to stress that this is not simply a technology issue. It's easy to talk about technologies and standards and things like that, but ultimately this is about cooking, and it's about how women have cooked for centuries, or their families have cooked for centuries, how they learned to cook from their parents, from their mothers and grandmothers. And so there's a very deep cultural element to this as well, in terms of changing behavior. And it's a very difficult issue. So it's very simple in some sense to talk about and define as a problem, but very difficult to solve, both on the cultural side and then also on the business side of getting these products, the distribution chains into the villages, and making the products affordable through financing to consumers. So we launched the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves in 2010. We have, I think, over nearly 700 partners right now, including 38 countries. Many of the leading industrial partners are active in India, based in India, and we have many partners that the Alliance is thinking through an implementation strategy in India right now. And it's a very sort of exciting time. We're not trying to, our goal is to reach 100 million homes by 2020. We're not trying to sort of give away 10 million stoves a year for 10 years. We're trying to build sustainable markets that produce high-quality products that women will want to use and pass on to their children. Change the aspiration for what the cooking space really is in a home, and make that impact last and endure. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. And I hope when we get to the discussion portion, you can talk a little bit about some of the big constraints that you faced and how you're seeking to address those constraints. So the next panelist that we're going to call on is Dr. Vinod Agarwal. He's the founder of Applied Solar Technologies Private Limited, which builds and operates photovoltaic-based off-grid installations. And he's going to talk a little bit, I think, about the model that they're pursuing, which is not even microgrid, but really a kiosk model that he's pursuing. And Vinod, do you want to take it away?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Nisha, and thank you, Terry, for inviting me here. Really appreciate that. This is my first conference here, Summit, and I'm very impressed with the quality of conversation and participants. I've been living in this country for almost 40 years, but about 5 years back, I decided to go to India and try to do something in solar. And we are operating in these very remote areas of UP, Uttar Pradesh, and Bihar. And what we are trying to do right now, at least, is provide solar as a replacement for diesel for telecom towers. And as you know, telecom is very prevalent in India, and everybody has a cell phone. And the reason is because there's many, many cell phone towers, even in the remotest part of India. Interestingly, in these remote parts of India where there are cell phone towers, there's no grid power at all. And many of these towers run totally on diesel, 24 hours of diesel genset, and maybe some battery backup. So we go after these very absolutely worst-case towers where the diesel is being used for 22 hours a day, and minimize diesel by using solar. We have installed over 2,000 towers now, and we are present in almost every single district of Bihar and about 1/3 of UP. And because we work in these remote areas, we have some access to real ground realities of what works and what doesn't. But having done that, now I look around the villages where these towers are, and there's no grid power. So if you go there in the evening, then all of a sudden it's completely dark. There's a beautiful, big high technology tower there, and solar panels which are generating energy, to fuel that tower. But there is no energy at all. I mean, people are using kerosene lamps or these stoves, and there's no power at all in the form of electricity. So by design, each telecom tower is located in an area so that there are at least 1,000 to 2,000 inhabitants within a few kilometers of the tower. Otherwise, there'll be no need for a tower there, right? So there are people living there. They have cell phones, but they have no grid power. They have no other form of electricity. In fact, many of these people walk 5 miles, 10 miles to get their phones charged so they can use them, come back and use them. So it's a very fascinating way things work out there. So the way we are looking at ourselves is that each tower, we think of ourselves as a point of presence. And I say to myself that if I have 2,000 people right to each tower, next to each tower, and I have 2,000 towers, there are 4 million people I have access to as my potential customers for providing energy to them in some form or the other. And the question is, how do I provide that energy? Now I'm generating the energy. I can add more panels if I want to, so I can generate more energy. The trick is the distribution part, and clearly the collection part, which is the difficult part, right? And so there have been a lot of ideas related to microgrid. I know many people in India are trying in parts of Africa and other places. But the clients I'm looking at, the customers I'm looking at, are customers who can afford no more than $2 a month for their entire energy usage, especially for the lighting part of it. So, in $2, it's very hard to get the microgrid going and make money on it. I'm a strong believer that whatever we do should be such that we can do it without the subsidies from government. It has to be a purely commercially viable activity. Otherwise, it'll run for a few years of, few projects, and they'll run out of its steam, because there is no money there. So we have been looking at some easier ways of distribution and collection, and I can tell you up front that I'm not successful as yet. Part of the reason I'm here is to see if there are other people who can help me actually make success of it. So we look at places like milk centers or places where villagers will go every day, no matter what. And we provide charged batteries, and the batteries are charged through our energy center or through the panels which are at the telecom tower. Every villager in the morning from every household will come in the morning either to get a milk or to deposit milk or do something like that or get water or something from the well. And at the same time, they'll bring their discharged battery and leave it there. And then we'll charge it during the day, and in the evening, they'll take the battery back. That way, the cost of distribution is reduced to almost zero because, the person is coming in any case to that place. And so the only thing you have to charge is for the actual charge, so the power, And it turns out that if you charge $2, you can actually provide lots of electricity for $2 a month. And so, we have done one village, and now we are starting this on another village where we'll be doing about 600-700 different households. The challenge is collection. It's very hard to collect $2 a month from every household in a viable manner, in a cost-effective manner. If the cost of collection is more than $2, clearly it's not going to work. So that's my big challenge, and I'm trying to put it out in the open and see if there are technologies out there or if there is some other entrepreneur model or some other model which is effective that we can adopt based on your experience that will allow us to penetrate villages and provide electricity. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Interesting. And I wonder, and maybe in the discussion we could talk about whether you're looking at mobile payments as one potential arena for a collection scheme.
Yeah, definitely, some kind of a prepaid model or mobile payment model will be very attractive, absolutely.
So we're going to move it to a slightly larger scale, and Dr. David Girard is going to talk a little bit about microgrids and scaling microgrids. And so David Girard is a professor and director of Energy Resources and Environment Program at Johns Hopkins University. He holds a professorship with Prince Sultan bin Abdul Aziz Professorship in Environmental Policy. And Dr. Girard is also a global leader in energy and power technology, innovation, infrastructure investment, science, and policy, focusing on resilient and sustainable solutions to climate stability, energy security, and poverty reduction. He served as the Vice President of Research and Evaluation and a Special Advisor on Energy and Climate at the Rockefeller Foundation, and he's going to talk a little bit about the efforts that Rockefeller is undertaking on microgrids. So, David, let me hand the microphone.
Thank you very much, Nisha. I apologize for my voice in advance, recovering from the Washington malady of a cold. It was 3 years ago that my good friend Patchy Pachori invited me to launch SPEED, as we're calling it, Smart Power for Environmentally Sound Economic Development, which is this mini-grid project supported by the Rockefeller Foundation, and you allowed me to announce it 3 years ago. Well, it's gone, contrary to the metaphor, it's gone much more slowly than we expected. In fact, SPEED has moved at the glacial pace. But there are reasons for that. This is a very tough problem. And I don't want to sound glib about it, but what I did want to say in the 5 to 7 minutes I have is simply what we've achieved, what SPEED is aimed to do, what we've achieved so far, what we have not achieved and why, and what is the challenge of actually scaling so that instead of 10 pilots, 20 pilots, and so forth, we have tens of thousands of villages and eventually 400 million people served by 2030. So I just wanted actually to show just 3 or 4 slides. So if you could just have the next one. Basically, this is just the notion of the Rockefeller Foundation is to create livelihoods and increase economic opportunity for poor and vulnerable people. So this is not just about providing green energy, this is about social and economic development. As Vinod quite rightly said, the cruel irony is that you have 400 million people who have access to cell phones, but to use Patchy's phrase, have never seen a light bulb. And this is a cruel situation that, of course, the foundation aims to remedy. So it's not just about taking the cell phone towers and providing solar energy to the cell phone towers. It's not about greening the cell phone towers. It's about using the cell phone towers as one load, we call it the anchor load, for, say, a energy service company, an ESCO, that's providing power to the tower and the villages and the businesses. The World Bank has started calling this speed model the ABC model. Anchor tenants, businesses, whether it's water pumping, agro-processing, and consumers. So this is the concept. I'm just trying to move it to the next slide. So this is what it looks like visually, is that the idea is that there's a micro utility with a combination of renewable energies. It provides power to the tower, and it's critical to provide 4 nines power. This is 24/7. This has not been done before in many of these rural mini-grids. Many of them only operate 6, 8, 10 hours a day. And of course, there also has to be the host villages with micro-enterprises and public use. So that's the quick visual gestalt. Well, this is, I'm going to show at the very end, because that's the last slide. So bearing that in mind, the foundation actually is supporting a program at the School of Advanced International Studies, Energy, Resources, and Environment, but there are also about 5 or 6 Indian partners whose job it is to work with energy service companies, private developers, to put up mini-grids in villages. And they're doing a lot of what I would say is the infrastructure work for companies to be interested. There's a lot of demographic information that needs to be collected about those villages, what people are currently spending on fuel, all of the work that no private developer is going to undertake. This is what the bank and the IFC are beginning to do now, to create the right investment and to reduce risk for private developers. And essentially, our Indian partners are doing that. We've also done a fair amount of analysis in terms of business models. And just to cut to the main difficulty we find, on the micro level of the individual grids, they're finding a very hard time getting loan financing from the banks and equity financing. The one signal I get from all the private developers is bring the interest rates down from 15% to somewhere like 7 or 8, and then that'll make a dramatic difference. That's a policy issue. The banks are inherently, as you know, very conservative. They don't look at the upside, they look at the risk. Will they get paid back? They don't look at the fact that this could be a very profitable new industry with 400 million mini-grids, or several million mini-grids over the next 20 years. This could be a whole new industry for India. They look at the downside. The next problem is aggregation. Clearly, when we go to the international financial institutions like the IFC and the bank, the IFC particularly wants to see a minimum investment of a minimum of $20 million. And $20 million represents at least 50 of these mini-grids, 50 or more. So the task is, how do we get aggregators on the scene who will take these individual mini-grids and package them for investment? And of course, the individual mini-grids have to make sense. The banks will only lend to them, by the way, if they show that they have a power purchase agreement with the cell phone towers for 10 years, if they have some agreement with the businesses in terms of a kilowatt, X dollars for so many kilowatt hours, and if they have prepaid arrangements with the consumers. So they really want to see the revenue model before they lend any money to the ESCO. But each individual ESCO has to be financially viable, or else we have another slice and dice mortgage crisis, where we put together a package with a lot of junk in it. And that's not going to work. So we had a meeting in the Rockefeller Foundation Conference Center, where many of you have been. Patchy has been many times. Last summer, we had all the multilateral banks. We had some sovereign wealth funds. We had foundations. And we had some private investors. And we said, how can we solve this problem of blending different colors of money was the phrase we used, bringing grant money with long-term loans, concessional loans, long-term equity. How can we put this together as a package to fund aggregators who will aggregate the projects? Because this is what's needed to de-risk the investment. And so far, there's a plethora, as we all know, of institutions trying to promote mini-grids, but doing it in a completely uncoordinated fashion. So there obviously needs to be a blending of colors of money, or OPIC now is beginning to call this alignment of capital. We would call it blended capital. And they are seriously working on means to do this. So we had this meeting, and this is what we came up with. We are having a follow-up meeting in 3 weeks. But the meeting we came up with was, I just keep persevering here? Okay. It works. This is a very complicated diagram, which we called a lasagna diagram. But the basic, I've described the basic concept, which is you have different forms of capital at the top, private equity, sovereign wealth funds, you have loans from multilateral banks, you have grants from foundations like Rockefeller, Gates, and others. Then you have some institution that is the custodian for this capital. And then you have something that we call a Sustainable Development B Corporation. This is actually a kind of entity that will be able to finance, that will be able to deliver the services. That's the delivery mechanism. And right at the bottom, you have the Sustainable Development Portfolio with lots of little projects. So there has to be some aggregator on the scene. And currently, and I'm going to sort of close by saying, therefore, we need two forms of aggregation here. We need the blending of capital to de-risk the investment, and we need some entities, whether in India or anywhere else, who can play the role of aggregators. And we need some entity in between that will deliver the service. So that's the way we are focusing on this. We have a few pilots up and running, but the real challenge is to identify those aggregators on the Indian scene, and we are planning to have a major meeting in November in Delhi, hosted by Jamshed Godrej, to bring together some of the project developers, potential aggregators, expertise from around Delhi, and also the different colors of money. The idea is we're aiming to bring some investable portfolios to the table in Delhi so that this would not be just speeches, but hopefully will be a chance to attract investment to aggregated portfolios. So that's the task ahead of us. It's been a very tough road. It's a very easy concept to describe, very difficult to implement. So I just want to stop there, and then we can have questions.
Great, thank you. You've given us a lot to chew on and think about here. And I think our next panelist, Amy Christensen, is exactly the right person to kind of build on that. Amy is the founder and CEO of Christensen Global Strategies, which advises clients seeking to address global challenges of climate change, ecosystem degradation, and resource scarcity, and their impacts on conflict and development. Her clients have included such notables as the Clinton Global Initiative, Duke Energy, the Elders, Global Observatory, Ogilvy, Rockefeller Brothers Fund, et cetera, and the list goes on. And she advises them both on the corporate and philanthropic strategy and policy and legislative issues, but she's also particularly focused on looking at global climate change strategies from the corporate sector. And so, Amy, why don't I hand it over to you?
Thank you. Sometimes it's hard for people to summarize my bio because I've worn a lot of hats over the last 20 years, 15 of those here in DC, and so I've served in government at the Department of Energy. I served in a large corporation, Google, when it was in a rapid growth phase, working on climate strategy. I worked in the World Bank doing carbon deals, and now I'm working with governments and corporations on these strategies, and I'm also investing directly in solar projects. And so my perspectives today come from having worn all of those hats. So it's a bit wide-ranging, so builds on the discussions today with some focus on energy access, but also the broader issues of growth and sustainability and how do we support those issues and accelerating our progress on those issues. So first of all, finance. We've talked about it a lot today. And I think, first of all, key barriers to finance underlying systemic barriers. One is the training for the financial institutions. And in the CEO roundtable yesterday, we heard about how that's a major barrier for attracting investment at a reasonable rate of return, because the financial institutions just don't know how to quantify the risk, and they often overestimate what that risk is and therefore charge too high a rate of return on that investment, and therefore makes these projects infeasible. And so that's something that the State Department, that Carlos Pascual and his team I know have been working on in India and elsewhere, which is how do we train those financial institutions to understand these technologies, these new business models, and set those rates accordingly and allow the money to flow and the projects to proceed. Another area that I think needs to be built upon, and that Carlos is working on, and that David mentioned that Rockefeller's supporting, is how do we align different types of investments. You have different investors willing to take different types of returns, different sizes of return. And the U.S. government, as we heard today, USAID's program, providing some of that risk de-risking support, but also Overseas Private Investment Corporation, which we heard briefly about, but I think it's significant to note their policies, their practices, and how they've moved from 5 years ago, only moving $10 million a year into clean energy, to now $1.6 billion moving into clean energy support and investment. And this is a U.S. government agency that makes a profit, the only U.S. government agency to do so through its work. And so they, as a model, need to be replicated by other bilateral agencies around the world. Another avenue, I think, to build on, to mobilize investment quickly in the clean energy sector, which Coca-Cola mentioned earlier, which is this enabling decentralized energy development, but at a large scale. So allowing direct power purchase agreements between a major energy user, like a Coca-Cola bottling facility, like a Walmart, others with those energy developers. Allow them to have a direct power purchase agreement for 20 years. And then Charles Ebinger earlier mentioned the challenges about creditworthy off-takers. Well, when you have a major global corporation, that creditworthiness isn't an issue, and pricing isn't an issue because the parties establish the price between themselves, and then that investment will flow to those projects. And as an investor in solar projects currently in the United States, we talk a lot about how do we increase clean energy in India, but in the United States, we face a lot of barriers as well. And one key tool that Congress is currently considering is the use of what's called a master limited partnership. And not to get too technical, but the fossil fuel industry has had access to this tool for decades, and it's time for the clean energy industry also to be able to use this financial tool, because we have had inconsistent government support for clean energy investments through tax policies that change constantly, and the risks and rewards just don't work for us to really scale clean energy here. And so that's a model also that could be considered in India. Beyond financing, I was just going to mention briefly trade. We talked about bilateral trade opportunities, and Dr. Holdren noted there's $500 billion worth of trade coming into India. There are massive trade barriers to clean energy technologies, whether it's the tariffs themselves or its content requirements. And so addressing those trade barriers at a bilateral level or even multilateral level is something the clean energy industry, I think, would serve itself well to focus on, working with governments to get that done, because the more efficiently we move those technologies, the lower cost these projects will be, and the more we'll be able to scale up. And the International Center for Trade and Sustainable Development in Geneva is working on this sustainable energy trade initiative, and they're recruiting companies into a coalition of companies to work with governments on this issue. If anyone's interested, I'm happy to speak to you afterward about that work. Third, women. So we had a session on women in the green economy, and in order to be successful in scaling clean energy, we need to empower and enable women as entrepreneurs. Women are the primary energy consumers, as we heard earlier, and we need to support those women. And so it's initiatives like the Women in the Green Economy campaign that Earth Day Network is working on to identify those strategic interventions to support women in the green economy, and also the C3E initiative that the Clean Energy Ministerial has been incubating DOE to help support women and their development in the clean energy industry. So women need to be more empowered, and I would note the last couple panels were very scarce in women participants, and that we need to address that ourselves as well in this industry. So besides ideas on finance, trade, and women, what else do we need? And I was going to talk about leadership, but it's always such a nebulous term. And so to be specific about leadership, I'm talking about governments, companies, providing a vision and then a roadmap. so that people can see where are we going and how do we get there and what's their role in helping us get there. And one example of that I think is important to mention is the UN's Sustainable Energy for All initiative. I worked on it last year to help bring in the private sector to that initiative, where the UN is providing that vision of by 2030 reaching universal 100% energy access, modern electricity, modern cooking solutions, doubling renewable energy share in the global energy mix by 2030, and doubling our rate of energy efficiency improvement also by 2030. Fast timeline at scale. That vision is then being supported by the UN working with the private sector, with governments, with civil society on a national level, country by country, to address the policy and other barriers, the barriers to financial flows, bringing the private sector with governments and civil society to address those and figure out how each country can help to accelerate investments in all three areas. And I would just note that Rashenda Van Leeuwen was on the Women in the Green Economy panel earlier, and for those working on energy access, her practitioners network is an incredible resource. She has over 1,200 members from primarily businesses, but also governments and academics and civil society. And they're sharing strategies as well as advising governments and building on more effective business models and financing tools. So my final offering for helping to deliver energy access and supporting growth and sustainability is the wider system change. And Al Gore spoke about it last night in his talk. But this is something that I've been working on with a number of companies, as well as governments, which is changing what we value on our business balance sheets and on our government balance sheets. And GDP is inadequate, as the Vice President noted. It is not a proxy for human well-being, which is what we're all working towards. And so if we have better incentives to deliver broader than short-term financial returns, we can also deliver energy access and better sustainable growth. And the good news is that corporate leadership is already taking place. David mentioned the B Corporation model, which is one tool under US legislation where companies can register as a B Corporation to deliver social and environmental as well as financial outcomes for shareholders. In addition, companies like Puma are using environmental profit and loss statements to understand what is their environmental risk. If carbon and water really get valued the way that Puma predicts they should be and will be, it would reduce their profit by half. And so they understand their risks and therefore can reduce their environmental impact accordingly. Unilever has decided to stop providing quarterly reports, quarterly projections, because they think it undermines their long-term value creation. Generation Investment, which Al Gore spoke about last night, is performing very well financially, but largely, he believes, because of their sustainability screen, their focus on companies who have strong environmental performance, social performance, because there is a direct correlation between social and environmental performance, good governance, and good corporate financial performance. Now on the government side, just a quick nod, Charles Ebinger mentioned India's good friend Bhutan and their boon from their hydroelectric development. Well, they also have gross national happiness, and everyone sort of laughs at happiness. Oh, isn't that quaint and isn't that sweet? Well, actually, they have a robust 9-pillar system with 72 indicators, which they judge every investment, every project, every policy against. And those are well-being indicators, so broader than those financial returns, everything from good governance to living standards to ecological diversity and resilience. So, and other governments are working on this. Costa Rica put a price on carbon in that country back in '95 under Jose Maria Figueres, who's now head of Sir Richard Branson's Carbon War Room, and his sister, of course, is running the UNFCCC. And the UK Office of National Statistics is working on broadening GDP to add in other indicators, and the World Bank is working with over 40 countries to develop natural resource accounts. So I think these system-wide changes are the bigger picture within which we're all trying to work on clean energy, and they also need to be addressed. Thank you.
I just want to comment that I had a chance to go to Bhutan a while ago, and that happiness index is rooted in some very practical metrics. And, they measure all kinds of things like access to health care and access to sanitation as being key determinants of happiness. So it's not as kind of feel good and out there as one might think. It's actually quite rooted, I think, in data. So the final panelist that we have and that I want to turn to with great anticipation is Ambassador Manjeev Puri. And I know in the previous panel they had commented on the fact that there weren't any Indian policymakers in that panel, so there's an opportunity now for Ambassador Puri to be able to address some of the points that perhaps came up in the earlier panel. as well as make some I think, interesting points of his own, as he's indicated. So Ambassador Puri is the Deputy Permanent Representative of India to the United Nations, and in addition to his illustrious career in the Indian Foreign Service, he has had some very significant dealings in the arena of climate change and clean energy. He was the coordinator of India's participation in the major economics meeting and served on the executive board of the Asia-Pacific Partnership on Clean Development and Climate. He's also been a member of the Indian delegation for the meetings on the Commission for Sustainable Development since 2005 and has actively participated in the UN Environment Program meetings on environment ministers. So he's certainly been engaging on these issues for a very long time, and with that, we'll turn the microphone over to him. He has promised to wake up and shake up this audience with his comments.
Nisha, thank you very much. First of all, I'm very delighted to hear about this happiness index, and I'm very happy to be here. And Pachi, thank you very much. Terry, Annapurna, I mean, you guys are wonderful. Thank you for putting all this together. Now, I don't know, do I have 30 seconds or do I have slightly more than that? Well, look, I come from the world of the United Nations, and I saw my dear friend at the other end was, reading or scrolling off that computer. But I've written down an intervention. I can, give a couple of copies. All of you can read it, but I propose to digress from what it says. But I'll tell you what I want to speak about. Look, since yesterday afternoon that I've been here, I don't think anyone here has any doubt that there's a huge amount of energy poverty in India. There's a huge need. There are needs for getting rid of this energy poverty, i.e. energy access, and there are huge financing needs. I think we all know it. And I'm very grateful for a lot of ideas that people have put over the years on both giving us policy advice, which is welcome, because you learn. That's very important. And in terms of the great initiatives. And let me say a word of great commendation to Terry for this lighting of billion lives. It makes a world of a difference. We have colleagues here who've been working on cook stoves, an initiative that initially we were all very much involved in the government, which they've taken really far, and to huge benefits to us. The solar energy, that's been a word which has been used repeatedly since yesterday afternoon. I want to commend all of these. I want to commend all these off-grid ideas, micro-grid, everything. But I want to leave a very big thought here. And the big thought I want to leave, and Mr. Provo, I'm glad that you are there, because you made reference to that. It's time that we made real, solid, and massive investments in research and development for some other way of solving the energy-climate conundrum. The metaphor going around since yesterday afternoon has been the cellular telephone. I think on this panel, everybody spoke about cellular telephones. Cellular telephones weren't done in India. They weren't done anywhere in the developing world. But they brought a sea change in the developing world. So what is the first point I want to leave to you with? The developed world, where the infrastructure for research and development is high. And I want to say the United States is the #1 place in the world for that. And my country has benefited. When I was growing up as a little child, we were referred to as the basket case of the world. The individual who India, in my personal opinion, should give our highest award is an American scientist called Dr. Norman Borlaug, who brought about this thing called the Green Revolution, food security for all of us. So what am I trying to say? You have the greatest potential to do work and innovate on how to solve this energy, which is absolutely essential for livelihood, for a better life, for economies, etc., and the climate conundrum. And let us frame it like that. Let us not frame it in terms of growth, etc. And the United States government has been the chief player in motivating research. Sir, you mentioned basic research. I think they've done much more than that. If the cellular telephony is where it is, if internet is where it is, it's not just the idea in the mind. It's been much more. But let me share with you my own experiences. Somewhere in the mid-2000s, when we started this Asia-Pacific Clean Technology Partnership, we were all taken to the Livermore labs. Now Secretary, then Professor Stephen Chu was the head of it. We spent 2 days going over what he described as ideas which need to be brought to fruition in the area of solar, converting solar to electricity without going through the fossil fuel route. So not photovoltaic, but other ideas. I'm not sure what has happened. 5 years back, in most negotiations, I used to be put in a corner and spoken to about carbon capture and storage. I say, where's it, man? What am I talking about? I'm saying a very simple thing. You know, we all talk about this business about affordability, appropriate technology. I'm all for it. Of course I want affordability. Of course that is important. Of course if we share IPRs, it'll help. I know all that. But my fundamental plea is please focus research and fund it in your own country. Huge, massive research to solve the energy climate conundrum and apply it in your country. Believe me, it will not even take a few months before things will reach all of us and go all over the world in general if it is a successful application in the developed world, in the United States and elsewhere. Cellular telephony is an example. Let me tell you where India comes from. Literally a few years after Stephenson invented rocket, that steam engine, railways came to India. That's Dr. Pachauri's starting point in all of these things. This is where we all come from. This is where the world in general comes from. And so I want to close. I want us to move away from thinking about, you know, sharing the advantages of benefits which accrue as a result of proprietarial technologies. I want us to move away. I also want us to move a little bit away from competition. Solar energy and the solar panels which became, and wind panels which became, you know, such a hit. A few years back, we used to all be told, feed-in tariffs, that's the answer to it all. And today, all we are told is there are WTO cases. This, you know, local value-added content is no good, you know, it's not letting things happen. Of course not. In these kind of things, this is what will happen. But let's really try and focus big. Let's make an effort and let's be consistent in that effort. I just want to leave this thought because I think that's good for everybody in the world, good for the United States, good for the people here, certainly good for me. And we look to you because you're the only people on the earth, as we know it, who can deliver. I'm going to close by giving an example. A few years back, when we developed the Millennium Development Goals, if you notice on the health side, there is nothing mentioned other than this maternal mortality and all, which are, you know, actions and things like this. But HIV/AIDS is mentioned as a specific thing. You know, simply by, in terms of action, we've actually been able to, I won't say get rid of it, but we've been able to lead it. And that's my plea. And that's what I said I'll try to do. This is a great forum. I'm sure it can take things to very high levels. And Madam Assistant Administrator, with your very important role, much power to your elbows, to be able to do this in your country. We will all benefit as a result. Thank you.
So, you know, my jurisdiction doesn't extend to within my country, but I will say that much of the successes that we've had in the past have been about the collaboration and the partnership between American academic institutions, American research, American scientists with other countries. And, you know, Dr. Borlaug, certainly the collaboration with Dr. Swaminathan is quite legendary. And so I would say that it's really what we can do together. And USAID has taken that very much to heart in terms of how we're looking at Asia writ large and how we're looking at India, which is it's about the partnership and the collaboration in addressing these shared challenges. And I think the challenges are what we've been grappling with here today in this panel. And it's talking about those constraints that we're facing in taking some of those technologies and some of that research that's coming out and deploying it and scaling it. And we heard a little bit about both at the micro level and taking that to scale, what are some of the challenges. And I think it would be interesting to maybe tease out that conversation a little bit. Vinod talked about the struggles that he's had in finding the business model and the payment schemes that can really expand. And I think the knowledge exists on this panel that can maybe give some guidance to Vinod a little bit on, how he can take that business model and expand it. I think, Jacob, you talked a little bit on the cook stoves and the challenges on trying to get this clean technology adopted in the households, making it, commercially viable and doing the behavioral changes that will allow those technologies to be adopted by households. And maybe we could start with you guys and talk a little bit about those. And then I certainly want to throw this open to the audience and have a little back and forth.
Are we starting with some more comments or just first going to the audience?
No, I was going to just allow you to kind of define a little bit of some
Oh.
of your challenges
Oh.
and Jacob, yours.
Go ahead, Jacob.
So I think for the cook stove sector, there's a bunch of challenges. One is a profound lack of awareness amongst users and as to the risks associated with cooking over these open fires. People just do not know about them. We do academic studies sometimes and educate people, and we find that generally that doesn't even work in a sort of integrated, in a surgical way to sort of provide information like that. We find anecdotally, at least, that when people receive a sustained message and there's a local champion, a local element, a women's group, or a local entity who has a presence in a village or a region that has the trust of the consumers, and they can continuously provide that message, that starts to flip that. You can start to change behavior based on health messages, but even then it's still an uphill struggle. And what we found, and there's now new studies out that indicate that perhaps the greatest lever of change is when you deal with the awareness and the social marketing at the same time as the financing, so that the consumer is able to as they process the need for changing a behavior that's so ingrained in them, and they start to think about that, they're presented with solutions for the very poor that are very difficult for them to afford. If you can address that affordability and that financing at the same time as you're addressing the social marketing, that may be the best lever. I'll go upstream a little bit as well and say that there's an opportunity and a barrier in terms of the sector more broadly. We've got, I showed pictures of some of them in the slides, a whole sort of new generation of cooking technologies that are out there. They're all emerging businesses by and large that are struggling to survive, struggling to grow as we try to figure out all these questions. And if we can't get the financing to them to improve their technologies, to adapt their technologies, to develop the manufacturing and supply chains, distribution chains, to get those products to market now, then in 3 years when we figure out the other pieces, they're all going to be gone and we're going to be starting over from scratch. And that's something that I worry about on a daily basis that we have to figure out how to do better. And finally, I'll say that it's interesting to me as someone who's sort of sitting in Washington from a policy perspective and thinking about the cook stove issue. Obviously, it's not the only thing I come across on a daily basis and work on, but here's a solar business, here's a cook stove idea. We're talking about energy and power more broadly. From a broader perspective on how I think we should really be solving these issues, it's in a much more integrated way. It's ridiculous and completely insane to expect every solar company out there to develop their own distribution channel, every cook stove company to develop their own distribution channel, every water purification or whatever company to develop their own distribution channel, every agricultural company who wants to help farmers, rural farmers, improve their crops, develop their own distribution channels. We should be aggregating these and trying to solve them, not just because it's better for people's lives and better for the environment and agriculture, which it is, because all of those combined will have an aggregated impact on health, agriculture, and everything else, but because it makes sense from a business perspective. But we tend to be sort of isolated as entities and as interventions, and I think we need to do a better job of facilitating that integration.
Thank you. I have several challenges. I just pointed out one which was related to the collection. But since Ambassador Puri talked about some of the technology issues, just let me give you an example. Currently, when we think about a battery for this village electrification, we use what is called VRLA battery, which is a lead acid battery. And for 1 day of charge, the battery is about 3 times the size of this. But if I could use lithium ion, it'll be about this size, okay? Almost 1/20th the size, except that, of course, more expensive. And then there's 30% tariff on it if I bring it to India. So there's technology out there, but it's going to cost me 30% more on the top of the fact that it's more expensive compared to this one. So what choices do I have? I have to carry this thing which is about 3 kilograms versus something which is maybe 30 grams, okay? Just because the tariff is one of the reasons. So there are a lot of technologies out there, but it's very hard to adopt those things in isolation unless there is a bigger understanding as to why this technology is needed. And furthermore, if the volumes are there, if I'm going to serve 400 million, even if I serve 50 million people out of 400 million people and use this technology, the price will drop, okay? But because I cannot use it, the prices are not dropping. So there is a vicious circle that goes on, and there is no way to resolve this unless there are bigger effort. And I think that's where the policies and governments can get involved in saying, look, if I'm using the battery, at least for village electrification, let's not have a tariff on it, let's not have this custom of 30% duty on it, okay? So that's one challenge I have. Cost of capital is clearly a challenge. I'm one of the major recipients of the OPEC money that was talked about earlier. In fact, my company has gotten a loan agreement with them, just signed up for $150 million. And so OPEC cost is very low, but I have to now hedge this fund, okay? And by the time I put hedging on it, because I have to make sure, with the currency fluctuations, that I can return the money, without getting, totally shocked by the changes that could happen in the currency, my cost of capital ends up going to 10.5%. So OPEC cost is very low. Hedging cost is like 3 times of that, okay? And, unless that thing is removed somehow, unless somebody else is willing to take that risk, there's not much advantage to getting this external funding, which is coming at such a low cost. And so neither OPEC nor I am making money on it. Clearly, the bank that is doing hedging is making more money than anybody else in the process. And that's a severe problem, it's a very serious problem. And I've talked to multiple people about this, and nobody seems to have an answer for it. But I think if there was a multitude of financial institutions that were willing to somehow take advantage of the fact that there are corporations who make earnings in dollars outside, and we make money in rupees, somehow there could be a way of leveraging that. Some kind of an arbitrage could be created. And instead of 6% on hedging, if it could be 2% on hedging costs to take care of that premium, that would be extremely useful. I think that'll make a huge difference if my cost of capital went down from 12% to 6%. I could probably continue to talk about it, but I'm taking too much time, so I'm going to stop here and pass on.
I think Amy wanted to have a follow-up question.
I just have a question about that. I think it's such a critical issue, the currency risk that you have to then deal with yourself. So I'm wondering about, would it be addressed if you actually had access to domestic financing from the domestic financial institutions? I mean, OPEC is stepping in there because ostensibly you're not able to get that, and the question is, why not from your domestic institutions? Is it that risk perception of the technology, of the business model, et cetera? And if so, could something like what State Department's working on with training financial institutions to have that better understanding, can that help address it? I was wondering.
Thank you, Amy. I think both. I mean, we do have some funding or debt from local institutions. It's about 14%. But I think the bigger issue is the risk associated with going to the local banks and have them understand, as we have heard this repeatedly, that banks do not want to take that risk on renewable energy, either because they don't understand it or because the risk profile is such that it doesn't fit their way of thinking about it. I mean, my experience after being in India for 5 years is that the banks are extremely conservative, and in some sense it's very good that they are, because we don't run into serious problems that many other countries do. But on the other hand, we are not able to take big projects that require a lot of risk, and therefore we have to come to EXIM and IFC and OPEC, who are willing to understand that risk.
Can I ask a question? So,
Sure, please.
So the USAID has a development credit authority, which is not U.S. money. It's a U.S. backstop to local loans in local banks, and that can be a tool leveraging U.S. financing to backstop funds locally. So that might be a way to hedge that.
Absolutely. If there's a way, we'd love to see that. I mean, I know that we have some money from IFC as well, and that comes in rupees, but they hedge it themselves, and it ends up being about the same 10.5%, right? So.
I think I've worked with USAID. I think you run into the same issue of hedging problem.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
See, I haven't found anybody who is willing to take care of this hedging, and it's a big issue as far as I'm concerned. I think if we can take care of that and use, cost of capital, which is outside of India very low, I think there'll be huge penetration possible.
Before we turn to the audience for questions, I also wanted to just turn to David to talk a little bit about what he was mentioning in his presentation on aggregators, and particularly if there are ways of aggregating different streams of technologies in common platforms.
Thank you. I find I'm resonating very much with some of the issues that Nod has pointed out, because that's what we're getting from our partners on the ground. And you reflect that very accurately and faithfully. On the aggregation side, remember we're talking about two forms of aggregators. The financial aggregation to de-risk the investments, equity and debt, and then the operational aggregation, which is to get economies of scale that will drive the kinds of things that Manjeev Puri was talking about, which is that, yes, there are niche technologies that are very exciting, coming out of various labs in the United States. The MIT Research Lab is an example of this. Just a simple example. Take the photovoltaic cell. At the moment, it only captures maybe 1 or 2 wavelengths of the solar spectrum, which is why it's so inefficient. But there are designs now that take it up from the 15% efficiency level to 50%. That's a disruptive breakthrough, because you're using 1/3 or 1/4 the amount of land at even lower cost, because the limiting point right now is no longer the cost of the cell, it's the cost of the balance of system. So there are breakthrough technologies which, if we have aggregators who are in a position to have some market power to place orders and create a market and a demand for these newer technologies, this would be significant. And we were warned again and again by a couple of venture capitalists and technology innovators that we had in our Bellagio meeting. They said, don't get locked into obsolete technology. And don't just scale up mechanically. You have to scale up with aggregators who can also create a market for innovations that are occurring both in battery systems and in photovoltaic systems, where, of course, the major advances are likely to happen in terms of cost and performance and reliability. Much more so because these are all, as you know, systems based on nanotechnology, quantum mechanics, and this is where the big breakthroughs are going to lie. So the aggregators can play a role in assuring that kind of volume production. The same strategy that President Bill Clinton used for getting the price of AIDS drugs down, to have aggregation so that the cost would come down and you create a market. And this is an old idea, but it needs to be brought to the table once again.
Thank you. And so, this is one of the areas that USAID is exploring now in India is what can we do to help create the kinds of alliances that bring together the different entities at different levels that can create the greater scale. Because I think all of the efforts individually might bring a lot of promise, but it's very hard to achieve the scale. So we're looking to see what kinds of platforms we can try to support, whether it's in the renewable space or in some of the other sectors that we're working in. But I want to pause now and just turn to the floor to see if there are questions in the audience, because I know we probably only have about 10 minutes or so before we need to conclude this session. Okay. Oh, yes. Go ahead.
So talking about aggregators, have you talked, I'm probably looking at Jacob to maybe start it off, have you talked with somebody like Hindustan Lever or ITC, who was EchoPal, to kind of use their distributor system, which is they have penetrated the rural market very aggressively to address distributing cook stoves and maybe even giving an education. And I do have a question for Pachauri. Dr. Pachauri is, what is your experience with trying to get, if you look at innovation in US, I would like to say, especially, I don't know about other fields, but in energy, at least 30% of are Indians. What will it take for India to have innovation side going somewhat like ARPA-E equivalent? So those are the two different questions.
So the short answer to your question is no. The longer answer is that the stage that the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves, which is the entity that's leading our work, is they are in the process right now. They selected 6 initial countries to focus their work in, and they're growing that very slowly to include other countries. So India was not an initial priority country, although we have many partners in India. But they're starting to work with very specific states in India, which are, in terms of size, bigger than probably most of the other countries. They'll be working on each one individually. And they're starting to develop and then launch country action plans in each of those countries in those states in India. And so that will be the moment when they bring in the private sector, companies like, exactly as you had mentioned, along with our partners in FICCI and what's the CII, and all the other banks that we're working with in India. So at that point, I think they will start to explore in those markets who are the companies that have the distribution networks, what can we leverage off of the existing ones from major corporations like that, but also what are the other companies that are selling products like either solar voltaics or even Coca-Cola or cell phones, whatever it might be, to leverage those distribution networks as well to layer this onto it in the most efficient way possible. So that's a central part of what we want to do, but we haven't done it yet in those particular states in India, which I think are Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and I want to say Orissa or Bihar, one of those two. So.
Well, just a brief response to the question that was asked of me. What would it take to create an ARPA-type organization in India? Well, frankly, it'll require a complete restructuring of the bureaucracy. Because by definition, ARPA-E has been successful, and I think the very purpose behind launching it was to see that it essentially functioned like a professional venture capitalist kind of organization. Now, I'm not too sure whether in India, people would be willing to take risk, and by the time you get a proposal, you get a project evaluated, nobody is going to put his signature to funding it till they're absolutely sure that there would be some benefit. Now, having said so, there is a lot of research and development money, but I'm afraid it's not directed in a way that would ensure some economies of scale. And I'll give you an example. Many years ago, we volunteered to carry out an assessment of the research funding of what is now the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. And we found that for biogas research, they had funded something like 100 different projects. What was the average value of the projects that were funded? About 5 lakhs of rupees. Typically what happens is someone puts in a proposal, I'd like to do some work on biogas. Okay, you take 5 lakhs of rupees, you take 10 lakhs of rupees. There really isn't a strategic orientation. And that's why I think an organization like ARPA-E has been very successful in my view. So I think we need a radical change in the way we function, the way we institutionalize research. It'll happen one of these days, but it's very difficult to predict under what conditions that might happen.
So maybe the follow-up question is, can you influence the National Clean Energy Fund to have, say, 20% or 30% to do something like an ARPA-E? Because they are supposed to use that money for development and R&D.
But so far, that fund has hardly been used, and
Yes,
last
exactly right.
last information I got is that they've asked KPMG to carry out an assessment of how that fund should be structured and utilized. And let's see what comes out of it.
Hi, Joey Furman, NRDC. I'm curious about the Energy for All initiative you're talking about. I had just started reading about it yesterday, so it's opportune that you're here. I'm curious specifically if you want to expand on it more, that'd be great. But I'm especially interested in, since we have these, very ambitious on-the-ground practitioners in different scales and fields operating, if you can talk about how that initiative will affect people like Vinod's work, and if other panelists want to speak to their perspective as practitioners on this Energy for All initiative, because obviously if it were the case that we had reached that mark today, we wouldn't be having this conference. So yeah, thank you.
It's exactly designed, there we go, to bring people like Vinod who know exactly what the barriers are, what the challenges are specifically to what he's facing, with the government officials, the financial institutions, and others who can provide those solutions. So just even this conversation enables me now to go back and actually talk to OPIC and say, are you coming across this challenge with all of the people you're working with in countries like this where you have currency risk, and have you thought about what could be a solution for this? And then also to go back to Carlos and his team that are working on pilots on this, of training financial institutions in country to better understand the risks facing this. So the UN is really the I think executive coordinators, I want to say, but the on-the-ground UN representatives, the country representatives, are serving as neutral conveners of business, government, civil society, other experts around how do we scale, how do we get to universal access and the efficiency and renewables goals, what are those specific mechanisms that need to be put in place, what are the policy changes that need to be made, and by making better connections between the private sector participants who are actually doing this and know what those challenges are in the government. Too much, they're having conversations that go like this. I mean, I was at Department of Energy from 94 to 98 doing Latin American energy policy, and those conversations between the private sector and governments to really understand what needs to happen from a policy perspective, financial mechanisms, de-risking, whatever it is, those conversations don't happen enough and they don't happen effectively. And so UN's really seeking to be country by country a neutral convener of those and to help work on these specific interventions that can help us get to these scales, to the scale that's needed. So hopefully that is what will happen, and I think that's what's required really to get to the scale we're talking about.
I think we have time for one final question in the back there.
Thank you very much, Raghuveer from India Globe and Asia Today. Great panel, and I think these 2 days both countries will learn, and I hope India will gain something from this. My question is that I have asked this question White House and State Department many times, as far as 8 years ago India and US signed, and I was there in the signing in the White House, between President Bush and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, civil nuclear agreement. Still stalled, I don't know where. No answer from India, no answer from the US. My question is that LNG is now issue on the Capitol Hill. Many favors that US should export LNG to India. How much this LNG will change or help India? Because India needs energy immediately. The Iranian oil is reduced because of the sanctions from the US. There is no pipeline, gas pipeline, which you've been talking about. So no energy, no development, no financing, no development. 2,000 projects in India are stalled by US government, Indian government projects. So where India will head without energy, immediate energy needs, where this will come from? Thank you.
So I think that's a perfect question for Ambassador Puri to handle.
Thank you, Nisha, and thank you, friend. Look, I don't represent India at the United States, but at the United Nations, but let me try and answer your question somewhat generally. And I think it goes back to what I said. First, if you were here when John Holden made his presentation and you saw that table, it highlighted in a very, very big manner, and before that also the Ambassador Pasquale, the huge amounts of energy deficits in India, energy poverty as we call it. We need energy and we need it from all sources. Now, you know where we are assembled here? In Terry with its huge environment backdrop. The fact is that we tend to think along renewables, which is very important. I mean, at the end of the day, let me make this point to you. A few years back, we used to be in the corner and were being told, you're not doing enough for renewables. You're not willing to take on a target, you're not willing to do this, that, and the other. You know, it's just been a few years, and I don't see renewables being the flavor of the season in your country here. And the change is because of one remarkable thing. If you read the World Energy Outlook, it's got chapter and verse in its executive summary on this subject, the shale gas revolution. But another part of me, what does it say? Wow, this is good, man. This is great. Because the world will have more energy resources. Of course, they will reach us. We're going through some processes at the moment. I don't have the answer of why those processes are going through, but those processes will hopefully get completed. Some of them are linked to geopolitics. These are part and parcel of the way things are done. But this will result in greater energy supply. So when we talk of energy access, let's be quite clear that the fundamental aspect is availability of energy, modern energy. The next important thing is its distribution. As far as I am concerned, there is no way, if that is what we want to solve, that today we need to shy away from fossil fuels, we need to shy away from hydrocarbons or from nuclear energy. We need to also embrace renewables in as big a manner as we can. All sources are important. So I want to just leave this thought with you that, you know, this is not just a desire, it's an imperative. We want it. We want it to happen. And whatever you can do, you said you were present last time. Well, I'm sure all of that is extremely important. We are democracies and we work through, people's power reaching all the way up and the trickle-up effect and so on and so forth. So thank you.
I think we're wrapping now, unless you want to extend it. Yeah. So I think we've gone well over, and so if there are additional questions, I'm sure that the panelists will be happy to engage in additional conversation. But I think this has been a great conversation, and I echo the final points that Ambassador Puri was making, which is that it's going to take a lot of different sources, and we ought to be looking at and supporting all of the different options. And certainly, from the U.S. government's perspective, we've been looking at how we can look at strengthening, the work that's going on with TAPI, with CASA 1000, as looking at those streams of providing energy supplies in connecting Central Asian energy supplies into India, as well as looking at the renewable sources that are within India, and then looking at the natural gas, the LNG that's coming online. So I think that there are a lot of different options out there, and I think we should be exploring and supporting all of those options. I just want to thank everybody and thank Dr. Pachauri in particular for organizing this conference and bringing this panel together.